Hello everyone, I'm Sali and welcome to TechBuddy. And in today's video, I am going to be talking about IEnumerable, or you could say enumerable, enumerator. There's a confusion and I'm just going to make everything clear for you. Today we are going to be diving into what IEnumerable is. We will be creating our custom type by derived or just using the IEnumerable, the interface, enumerable, the class that derived by interface. It could even be generic, and it is actually being used behind the scene for almost every sort of collection, and we are going to be doing an example today. Just before the start, if you like the content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive into coding. Let's start with answering the question, what is IEnumerable? In CSharp, IEnumerable is the interface that we can use for any iterable object, just like arrays, just like lists, just like linked lists, just like key value pairs, just like collections, just like dictionaries, hash set. Whatever you can think that we can iterate through via the loop, maybe for loop, for each loop, it doesn't matter. Actually, not for loop, for IEnumerable, it's mostly for each, but we'll come that to later. If you are able to iterate through, and that means that the object is sort of IEnumerable, so enumerable. So you can just loop through each element, each item, we could say. So let's start with an example. Let's say we have a list, integer list, int list. We've created something new. While we are going through int list, I'm now iterating through a list into a list, and I'm basically iterating every item. So every time for each loops just goes through, it's going to give me the next item. The next item is important. Every time for each loop runs, it gives me the next item until I don't have any item on the next side, until I reach at the end of the enumerable. So enumerable is a sort of an interface or expression that we could express our thing, our object, just to say it is something you can loop through. I'm keep saying that it's loop through or something. Actually, without just deleting the list, let's get into it. I'm just going to show you something. If you are seeing IEnumerable interface within the list, it's okay. Let's say we have hash set and get into it. And now we see IEnumerable again. Let's say we have dictionary and get into it. You're gonna see IEnumerable somewhere, maybe in dictionary. So IEnumerable here, but in the generic dictionary, you're gonna see IEnumerable again. So basically, IEnumerable gives you the ability, give your object the ability to be looped through for each item. So each item means, so you must have more than one item to give out when they ask you, when they request a new item, the next item, you should giving it to out. So let's say I have class numbers, maybe. I have numbers class, I've been creating it. So in that case, for example, I'm not gonna be able to loop through and var item in, let's say I have numbers. I'm now looping through in numbers and printing it. Number is like item. So you're gonna see it's failing because, see what it says, for each statement cannot operate on variables of type numbers because numbers doesn't contain any public instance or extension definition for get enumerator. That means if you wanna loop through into an object, this object needs to have a public or extension definition for get enumerator. So if I have, let's say, public void get enumerator here, would that be working? No. Now it says for each requires blah blah blah, get enumerator must have a suitable move next method and public current property. So now it says you're gonna have an let's say integer current property public, and also public void it's bool, I guess, move next method. So when it's called, return true or false, and void get enumerator, move next method, and public or something. So even though I'm just trying to create something over here that someone else can call, just like move next or current, it is not still applicable. If I had IEnumerable here by saying this is integer IEnumerable, now I'm just going to delete those, and it's going to say, okay, you need to implement that interface, and it's gonna give me something. The something is get enumerator and get enumerator again. So the get enumerator is from IEnumerator, and this enumerator is generic. Actually, if we can go into that IEnumerable interface, it has one generic get enumerator, and it's also derived by IEnumerable. Once we get in, it has enumerator, and it is not generic, the IEnumerable. So now I'm able to loop through within my object. But the thing is, what I'm going to give out. So for instance, if you remember, if it was a list, let's say number list, if it was a list, I was able to add something into my list here, 2, 3, 4 even. In that case, if I loop through within that one, what's gonna happen is, it's because I know this number list has 1, 2, 3, 4 items in it. And if I loop through, every time this breakpoints hit, the item would have the next value of it. So for the first time, it will be 1, and then the second time it's going to be 2 and 3 and so on. So what I know from that list object, it's going to give me, while I'm looping through, it's going to give me what I've given earlier. So I can create the same thing for my custom number class. The thing is that you're gonna return something back, and every time you're gonna increase something, it's because you wanna switch to next item. So that means you're gonna have something that you can have multiple values in it, like array maybe. So let's assume I have private integer array. I'm just going to call it array, and the default value for it, and let's say 3, and I would have 1, 2, 3. Actually, I don't need that one. So now I'm having an array which contains multiple items. So what I need to do is, within this enumerator, I'm going to give any item, all items in an order of the array. So once they called get enumerator, it's because I know for each requires IEnumerable interface object, and it calls get enumerator. And after having that enumerator, it is calling next, move next, and print the current. I'll be showing it how it works too. But in the current context, I'm going to just return every item in order from that array. So what I would do is, I can say, okay, let's start with that one. Return an array first element. Now it's gonna say, okay, you are returning only one item. So array is not null here, but you can just say, okay, you are returning an integer. I'm not able to convert it from integer to IEnumerable int. So you gotta give me something that I can use as enumerator. What I know is the list object, for example, has enumerator in it. How do I know? It's because it can be looped through. I can use it in for each, right? So what I would do is, okay, what if I have list object here, and say, okay, ints and new list. And it's again the same, actually 1, 2, 3. I would return this get enumerator, right? And that, just don't look at that. In that case, it's not complaining, see? So list has enumerator function in it, but what I'm trying to understand is how list provides that, right? I'm trying to create my own list. I cannot use any other object that has been created already. So what I'm gonna do is just gonna get rid of this list and try to do something with the array. But now we are going to meet, I'm just going to introduce a new keyword. Have you ever heard yield return? It's because when we use return only, I know the return returns everything. So after that one, even though I do something, it is unreachable. It's because the breakpoint is not, that breakpoint is not going to be hit. So it is just going to return everything and the rest of the code will not be executing. So the return, this is how return works. How yield return works is actually, you can have something after that one. So it's not complaining. It is not unreachable code right now. What happens is I can have multiple yield return. It's because IEnumerator and yield return is specific sort of code. So this is not returning every time, I could say. What it does, it returns the value you put on the right hand side. So 1 over here, it returns 1. But for the next time it's being called, it remembers what it returns previously. So 1. It says, okay, I'm not gonna return that one, but this time I will return this one. If I have 3, for the next time I call it, it remembers that it's already given me the 2, and then it's going to give me the 3 right now. So within that case, if I'm able to return multiple things in one method, and if CSharp is not complaining about this, I can use the same thing for array, right? So let's assume I have an integer counter started from 0. And every time they call array, I'm just returning counter and then counter plus plus. Within that case, so I will return everything I want, every item in the array. All right, a question for you. Until when I'm going to try to read the value from that one? So let's say counter is 0 and I read it, increased, counter 3, 2, 1, I read it, counter is 2, so I'm at the last element, and counter increased to 4, now it's going to throw an exception. So within that case, I can only yield return if the counter doesn't reach the array's length. So I'm just gonna say if counter equal or greater equal array length. So array length is 3, but it has to be 2. So if it is equal 3, then I will return only, but yield return. Do you think I can do that? No. That's why I'm just going to say, okay, do this. Only return, only yield return an item if the counter is lower than the length. So within that case, it's not going to be throwing an exception saying, okay, I couldn't access the item that you want to try to reach. Within that case, I did my enumerator, right? So for here, actually, I can use the get enumerator. I mean, not that one, but yeah, that one. So I can call that one. It is going to be returning an enumerator generic, which is derived by IEnumerator. So it's not gonna be a problem. So in that case, if I loop through from my numbers, not the list I created here, into my numbers, what do you think that we are gonna be seeing on the screen? Let me try to run this quickly. All right, so what do you think? Why do you think that we have only number 1? The problem here is getEnumerator method called only once, and I returned the value only once. So remember, getEnumerator called only once. I'm just going to show you quickly how for each works. So I said earlier, this list object has method, let's say number list get enumerator, right? So enumerator returns me an enumerator. So that enumerator has a couple of property or function. So the first property is current. It is integer. It's because the list was integer. So it's going to give me the current value and I'm going to print it. What else I have? I have move next. Is it familiar? Yes, in the beginning of the video. So move next I have current, I have dispose, and I don't have anything else. So within that case, if I have a while loop, and within while loop, I called move next, which means if I'm able to, if I have more items in my enumerator, I'm just telling. If so, then console write line, but not the item, but the enumerator's current value. This is what exactly happens in for each. And actually they are using it with using an enumerator call move next and get the current item. Every time you move next, its pointer is going to be move next and the current value will be set. And for the next move next, the pointer shows the next item in the array. Yes, array. So you can see an array if you go to the source code of the list item. The list actually is basically managing an array behind the scene. So they are manipulating and they are managing the array by using this sort of mechanism. They are not using it static, just like mine, and an array. They are just basically generating it dynamically, adding new item, extending it, adding new item, extending it. If you remove it, they basically shrink it as well. We can just get into details later. If you want to see more videos about that, please mention about this one in the comment section below. So getEnumerator is going to give me, so in that case, I called it only once, but I called move next every time. So what I would need, not something like that. So the if condition checks something and returns only once. What I would need is a for loop. So within that for loop, I would just do this one. So let's now assume that I called that one here and it returned an IEnumerable. But every time they called move next function, I would say, okay, yield return a counter, not counter, this is I. Return the first value. But remember where you left off. So as this is 4, it is totally different than returning something only once. This is going to return the value as many times as I have the items in the array. So if it is 3, then this is going to return the yield return 3 times when they ask. It remembers where it left off. So in this case, I'm going to run the application again. And now what I see is here, it's because of this one actually. Now what I see is this one, 1, 2, 3. So this is the array. So to make sure, I'm just going to get rid of those and we'll make it 3, 4, 1, 0. Now let's run it again. So 3, 4, 1, 0. So what I did is actually create my own custom object that you can loop through in it. So if I have add item function in it, for example, I would just add everything, anything, any item into my array. So when they are looping through, they would do the same. So can you just loop through twice, you think? So once, and this is the other one. And let me print something into over here actually. A new string and dash 25 times and run it, but don't forget the parenthesis. So run it. So see, I was able to loop through it twice. So it is now working. It's because, as I just said, every time you called for each, every time this part of the code executed, what happens is this actually called IEnumerator and find its move next function and assign the current value into the item. So when it's being called for the next time, it remembers where it left off. So it uses it. So this is where you can use IEnumerator. IEnumerator, you would basically see with return yield, it's because of something that I mentioned. You need to return multiple items so they can loop through every time and have the current value. You cannot just return anything like that. It should be returning multiple. So in that case, you're also not able to return an array just like that. Maybe you could yield return, you would say. No, it's not gonna work. You need to return something multiple so they can use it. This is how IEnumerable interface or get enumerative function works. This is what is happening actually when you are using for each loop. This is what is happening behind the scene for list object or the object that I mentioned earlier. It is happening the same for dictionary, for hash set, for linked list, for any other collection. Not for the array, but the array is being used behind the scene for this sort of more developed, I would say, more developed objects list. Array is the basic implementation of you can have multiple data in it, but the enumerator is making possible for you to have a for each loop and iterate every item. And this is how we can use. And this is the explanation of yield return. This is the explanation of get enumerator. And this is the explanation of any object to be used within the for each loop. If you like the content, please hit the like button. And if you have any question about this topic, or if you have any suggestion for the next video, you can just mention about this one in the comment section below. Until next time, happy coding.